what got a lot of attention in the last couple of weeks, if you're in the sort of the right circles, was Bill O'Reilly commenting that nobody can explain how the tides come in and out and why the sun rises and sets. It was sort of a backhanded reference to the power of God and the inability of humans to understand all of God's creation. So Stephen Colbert decided to poke fun at this and invited me in to do a quick little skit with him where he plays back the clip of O'Reilly saying that no one understands how the tides come in.
Jim, show us the light.
I'll tell you why it's not a scam, in my opinion. All right? Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that.
Yeah. Yeah, don't have any answer to that, do you, Mr. Atheist Pants? So get used to it, atheists. There is a God. He created the tides, and no one can explain what causes them.
Actually, Stephen, I can.
So no one understands. Only God understands. So then I knock on the door, and I come in and I say, I understand how tides go.
Astrophysicist and director of the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History, Neil deGrasse Tyson. What are you doing here, Neil?
I was at the planetarium at my office, and I overheard your confusion about tides, so I rushed right over.
You've also, you know, and it relates to your prior comments about Bill O'Reilly. You've certainly had a lot to say about this topic of science and religion, and I guess you could say your quote religion is kind of that of Einstein. No God necessarily, but plenty of awe and wonder at the universe.
Well, actually, it's not that I've had plenty to say about science and religion. In fact, that subject occupies no more than about 1% of my writings and an even smaller percent of my public talks. But what happens is these things get clipped and put on YouTube and they get re-quoted. And so if you do a search on my writings, what people seem to have reacted to the most are these comments and thoughts on science and religion. But they don't drive my interest in public discourse. And in fact, I've been invited to appear to debate religious people on panels, and I'm just not interested. It's not part of my public platform to argue about religion and God or the existence of God. I just don't have the interest in that. There are plenty of other people who do, who have forged their modern careers on it, and so go find them. I'd rather get people sort of thinking straight in the first place and getting them to celebrate the beauty of the universe and the laws of physics and all that drive it.
I can have one last comment on Richard Dawkins. It'll be quick. I was in the back row as you spoke, and so I could see sort of the whole room as the words came out of your mouth, as beautifully as they always do, and as articulately as they always do. And let me just say, your commentary had a sharpness of teeth that I had not even projected for you. It's more. It was my first time meeting him, and so I felt you more than I heard you, and I asked the question, and it gets back a little to what Francisco was getting at. You're a professor of the public understanding of science, not professor of delivering truth to the public. And these are two different exercises. One of them is you put the truth out there, and like you said, they either buy your book or they don't. Well, that's not being an educator. That's just putting it out there. Being an educator is not only getting the truth right, but there's got to be an act of persuasion in there as well. Persuasion isn't always, here's the facts, you're either an idiot or you're not. It's here are the facts, and here is a sensitivity to your state of mind, and it's the facts plus the sensitivity, when convolved together, creates impact. And I worry that your methods and how articulately barbed you can be ends up simply being ineffective when you have much more power of influence than what is currently reflected in your output.
I Just one anecdote to show that I'm not the worst in this thing. A former and highly successful editor of New Scientist magazine, who actually built up New Scientist to great new heights, was asked, "What is your philosophy at New Scientist?" And he said, "Our philosophy at New Scientist is this: science is interesting, and if you don't agree, you can fuck off."
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to mischaracterize that. I too have seen the famous YouTube clip, which is pretty spectacular when you think about it. You and Richard Dawkins at Beyond Belief, and it's spectacular because it's you and Richard Dawkins, first of all, but it's spectacular because you kind of represent two views on the complex, debated relationship between science communication education on the one hand and criticizing religion on the other. And so I guess even if you don't want to, you end up kind of having to be pulled into it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And the association is there. And I'm widely claimed by the atheist movement when in fact it's just not a part of my public persona.
I'm often asked, and occasionally in an accusatory way, "Are you atheist?" You know, the only ist I am is a scientist, all right? I don't associate with movements. I'm not an ism. I think for myself. The moment once someone attaches you to a philosophy or a movement, then they assign all the baggage and all the rest of the philosophy that goes with it to you. And when you want to have a conversation, they will assert that they already know everything important there is to know about you because of that association. And that's not the way to have a conversation. I'm sorry, it's not. I'd rather we explore each other's ideas in real time rather than assign a label to it and assert you know what's going to happen in advance. So what people are really after is, what is my stance on religion or spirituality or God? And I would say if I had to find a word that came closest, it would be agnostic. Agnostic, a word dates from the 19th century. Huxley, to refer to someone who doesn't know but hasn't yet really seen evidence for it, but is prepared to embrace the evidence if it's there, but if it's not, it won't be forced to have to think something that is not otherwise supported. Okay?
And it was funny, I don't know who created my wiki page, but in there, a few years ago, it said, Neil deGrasse Tyson is an atheist who's an astrophysicist. And I said, well, that's not really. So I said, so I put in there, Neil Tyson is an agnostic. And then 3 days later, or so, it was back to atheist. So there's an urge to claim me in that community. So then I had to, I had to word it in a way that would survive an edit. So I said,
Neil deGrasse Tyson, widely claimed by atheists, is actually an agnostic. And some will say, well, you're not being fair to the fact that they're actually the same thing. No, they're not the same thing, and I'll tell you why. Atheists I know who proudly wear the badge are active atheists. They're like in-your-face atheists, and they want to change policies, and they're having debates. So there's some urge to claim me, which is odd because my writings are not about religion, the way it is of many others who you've interviewed and who are all your pals. You know, Hitchens and, you know, Dawkins and Sam Harris. You want atheists, there's not a shortage of them right now, so why are you reaching towards me? So I said, I got to be cleverer how I edit this. So I said, all right, widely claimed by atheists, he is actually an agnostic. So that's managed to stay, and so there you have it. Do you know on my Facebook page, I was in Florida for the launch of the repair mission for the Hubble telescope, and I know some of the people on board. Some of them are astrophysicist colleagues and friends of mine. So I said, beautiful launch, beautiful day. I said in my update, status update, and I said, Godspeed, Atlantis astronauts. Well, in came this one. I thought you were an atheist. Why could you use such a word? It's like, then someone else said, actually, it says right here that he's agnostic. So this became the subject in the thread. I had to jump back in and I said, Godspeed was the banner headline the day that John Glenn was put into orbit back in 1962. And since then, it has been an iconic phrase deep within the culture of the aerospace community. If you're religious, it means God be with you up there. And if you're not religious, it's just being culturally honest about how aerospace people communicate with each other. And then I posed the question. I got this award from the American Humanist Association. So these are people who like cross off the word God in every dollar bill that comes through their possession. This is like an energy level that I can't even imagine having. So I said, you know, because they were upset about this too. And I said, well, how many people here have ever used the word goodbye? All the hands went up. I said, well, goodbye comes from God be with you. Oh, we didn't know that. That's what goodbye comes from. It's a contraction of God be with you. And when would you say that? When you left the city gates and had to go between cities in the dangerous countryside where you might get mugged or robbed or raped or worse. So you say, God be with you to protect you on your journey. Well, we don't have city gates anymore. We have space. So Godspeed is the counterpart to that expression because it's speed that's going to kill you going into orbit. So I find it a fact. So I'm okay with that. There's an interesting cultural history in the community of aerospace. And so that's why I can't claim myself, I can't agree to the claims by atheists that I'm one of that community. I don't have the time, energy, interest of conducting myself that way. I'm perfectly happy going to see the rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar. I have Handel's Messiah on my iPhone, along with Bach's B minor Mass. That's some of my favorite bits of music. This is what I do, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm perfectly fine with having religious people who live all around me. I'm not trying to convert people. I don't care. We're in a religiously pluralistic society. Most of what accounts for the immigration waves into this nation were people fleeing religious persecution in their hometown. And no one will deny the richness of this country as a product of the immigration that unfolded. I'm okay with that. Just keep it out of the science classroom. That's my little dog. Maybe it's a poodle, I don't know, but it's a... So you asked me if I'm agnostic. I'm agnostic. And it's more that I don't really care. I don't want to have to spend all this energy, but I keep getting called out into the boxing ring, largely against my wishes.
Okay, so I'll go on to Wikipedia now. He's a passionate agnostic.
Passionate. Devout agnostic. Yeah.
Devout agnostic, yeah.
And there are people who, there are philosophers who want to debate me about my saying that I'm agnostic rather than atheist because they want to claim that it's the same thing. And, you know, you could read definitions of words, but at the end of the day, it's how people behave, who associate themselves with those words that define what the word is. And so if you look at the conduct of atheists in modern times, that conduct does not represent my conduct. Pure and simple. I just don't behave that way. I don't cross off the word God in every dollar bill that comes through my possession in God We Trust part. I just don't do that. And so there's got to be some other word for people like me.
And it's odd that the word atheist even exists. I don't play golf. Is there a word for non-golf players? Do non-golf players gather and strategize? Do non-skiers have a word and come together and talk about the fact that they don't ski? I can't do that. I can't gather around and talk about how much everybody in the room doesn't believe in God. I don't have the energy for that. And so agnostic separates me from the conduct of atheists, whether or not there's strong overlap between the two categories. And at the end of the day, I'd rather not be any category at all.
And people are wonderful. I love individuals. I hate groups of people. I hate people who have a group of people with a common purpose. Because pretty soon they have little hats, you know, and armbands, and fight songs, and a list of people they're going to visit at 3 a.m. So I dislike and despise groups of people, but I love individuals. Every person you look at, you can see the universe in their eyes if you're really looking.
What is the most astounding fact you can share with us about the universe?
The most astounding fact.
The most astounding fact
is the knowledge that the atoms that comprise life on Earth, the atoms that make up the human body, are traceable to the crucibles that cooked light elements into heavy elements in their core under extreme temperatures and pressures. These stars, the high-mass ones among them, went unstable in their later years. They collapsed and then exploded, scattering their enriched guts across the galaxy. Guts made of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and all the fundamental ingredients of life itself. These ingredients become part of gas clouds that condense, collapse, form the next generation of solar systems, stars with orbiting planets. And those planets now have the ingredients for life itself. So that when I look up at the night sky, and I know that, yes, we are part of this universe, we are in this universe, but perhaps more important than both of those facts is that the universe is in us. When I reflect on that fact, I look up. Many people feel small because they're small and the universe is big, but I feel big because my atoms came from those stars. There's a level of connectivity. That's really what you want in life. You want to feel connected. You want to feel relevant. You want to feel like you're a participant in the goings-on of activities and events around you. That's precisely what we are, just by being alive.
So I dislike and despise groups of people, but I love individuals. Every person you look at, you can see the universe in their eyes if you're really looking.
That encounter that I had with Richard Dawkins, which I think is, if it's the one you're referencing, it's the most watched YouTube clip I've ever been in. And it was the first time I ever met him. And there's Dawkins. I'd read all of his books, and the guy's brilliant, and he's Oxford trained, which means he speaks well, and speaks perfectly in ways that Americans can only envy. And there he was. It wasn't just his written word. His spoken word was so sharp and so brilliantly barbed that it was like, wow. You know, if I were not as educated as I am, I would be completely turned off by the power of his capacity to communicate and leave me thinking that I'm stupid.
I'd rather unpack the word communicator and split it into two categories. One of them is, are you effective at what you do? That's kind of what communication means. It means you have a message, someone receives it. There are two ends to that line segment. That's different from, are you articulate? He's articulate. That man, Dawkins, you know, he's got a level of articulation of his delivery that would make any American jealous, all right? It's why we all wish we had some kind of fraction of the literary education that goes on in the United Kingdom over here. So he'll make his point, and he'll say exactly what he means, and he'll mean exactly what he says, and he'll say it with brilliant juxtaposition of words that we hardly ever hear much over here, but are brilliantly put together in a sentence. Yes, he's articulate. Is the message working? If it's not working, why not? Because being articulate is not the same thing as communicating. Communicating is understanding the mind of who you're talking to. Not just how great is your oration, let people come to it and paw at it and study it. Are you speaking straight to the soul of the person you're communicating with? And I don't think he is. Because there are people who are not as articulate as he is, who are actually put off by the weight of his expertise of oration. And I'm not trying to say he should, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that if he spent more time studying the mind of his listeners and wanted to have an effect on that mind, he would not communicate in the ways, he would not speak in the ways that he does. Because there's a sharpness to it. There's a wit to it. It's so sharp and so witty that it's almost aggressive. And it can turn people off, and it does turn people off.
He's so good at what he does, he's making enemies out of people rather than friends. And that's what led to my rebuke of his methods and tactics in that 2-minute clip of me commenting on his ways at that Beyond Belief conference. But that's I give two other whole presentations at that conference. One is semi-autobiographical, and another one is on intelligent design.
I want to call something to your attention that we all know intuitively, whether or not you've thought about it explicitly. You go around the world and you find times and places where nations have excelled in one subject or another. There's a birth of that period of where they excel, and then there's a peak, and sometimes it drops off, and sometimes they hang on. And so you can ask the culture of that. What was going on in that nation to support those discoveries? And then what happened when they ended? And so I call that sort of naming rights. If you were there first and you did it best, you name things. Particle physics in this country, in the United States, was like going gangbusters after the Second World War. And the discovery of atomic elements, look at the periodic table. There's berkelium, californium, you know, we got half the United States up there in the upper, heavier elements of the periodic table. Am I right there, Sir Weinberg? Okay, I don't wanna That's not because the world liked California or Berkeley. It's because the work was done here. It's because there was an effort to excel in just those subjects. And it shows up in other ways. I'll give you just briefly. You know, part of the naming rights is that you don't have to name it. So, for example, while we didn't invent the internet, we certainly exploited it here in America. We did that sort of first and best. And so your email address does not end in .us. Everybody else is in the world. They got to say what country they came from. We don't. Okay? It's simple, but it's the consequence of being there first and doing it better than anyone had done it before. Do you know that the British postage stamp is the only postage stamp in the world that does not identify the country of origin? Because they invented postage stamps. So why should they have to say what country it is? It's their invention. Okay? Check them out. It's just the facts of this. The constellations of the night sky, it's the Greek and Roman, and it's lasted to this time because they did a really good job thinking that stuff up. All the mythologies of the heavens, that really stuck with us. All right, so I'm going to make a larger point, not to get gratuitous on you here, but September 11, 2001, as we all know, this was going on in New York City. This is the view outside of my window. I live 4 blocks from ground zero. Excuse me, this is the corner of the building in which I live. I went outside to get this view. I was at the time judging whether I should go collect my daughter, who was in an elementary school 2 blocks north of the North Tower. North is to the right in this picture. So I want to get a closer view with a highly magnified zoom lens to see what, while that was happening, the plane flew into the South Tower. And so no one was thinking terrorism until the second one was hit. The first one was just sort of a bad tragedy. And so these are just 3 frames from my camcorder. This is at t equals 0. This is 1 second, well, like actually a fraction of a second. The plane was moving probably 500 miles an hour. And just to understand, the black building, that black sort of monolithic building, that is 50 stories tall. This is New York City, people. So tall buildings are kind of, they're just all over the place. And that's just a hotel, a 50-story hotel. And it's the towers are foreshortened because they're the angle at which this is shown. I put these up because a few days after this, President Bush, I don't remember where he said this, on the steps of the White House, in the Rose Garden or at the Capitol, in an attempt to distinguish we from they, the terrorists who flew these planes into the buildings and into the, that went down in Pennsylvania and in Washington, to distinguish we from they, he loosely quotes a phrase out of the Bible by saying, our God is the God who named the stars. Now, this is before I was on his Rolodex, okay? Because I could have helped him out there. The fact is, of all the stars that have names, 2/3 of them have Arabic names. So this was not, I don't think, his intent with that message. Okay? While the constellations are Greek and Roman, the names are Arabic, all right? And the list just goes on and on and on and on. And so where does this come from? How does this happen? How do you get stars named with Arabic names? How does this happen? And it happens because, of course, because, hang on, just catching up with myself here. Okay? It happens because there was this particularly fertile period that Professor Weinberg duly discussed. And around that period, that 300-year period, the intellectual center of the world was Baghdad. Baghdad. It was completely open to all visitors, all travelers, Jews, Christians, doubters, which today we might call atheists. They were all there exchanging ideas. All of them. All of them. And it was that period where you had the advances in, like, engineering and biology and medicine and mathematics. All right? Our numerals are called what? Arabic numerals. They ever stop and think about that? You know, who as in America, do we take pause at this? Why are they called Arabic numerals? Okay, they fully exploit the discovery of the zero, create a whole field called algebra, itself an Arabic word. Algorithm is an Arabic word. All this is going on, and it's all traceable, not to some long 1,000-year tradition in Islam. It's traceable to this 300-year period. This 300-year period. And then, so they had naming rights. The most expensive, beautifully carved astrolabes come out of this period. There's a great collection of these at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, if you ever want to check them out. So navigation, celestial navigation, all of this is traceable to this period. And so something happened. And what happened, as was previously described, I was told, and forgive me for repeating from what you might have heard, 12th century kicks in, and then you get the influence of this scholar, Al-Ghazali. All right? And so out of his work, you get the philosophy that mathematics is the work of the devil. And nothing good can come of that philosophy. That, combined with other sort of codification, philosophical codifications of what Islam was and would become, the entire intellectual foundation of that enterprise collapsed, and it has not recovered since. Over that period, all these books were translated into Arabic on a scale not seen since then. And so why am I even going here? Because I'm trying to explain to you that you fast forward, the dangers here is that you fast forward to 21st century America and ask, what influences are we feeling now? Because that period, that naming period in Islam stopped and it never recovered. Because the way of thinking about the natural world, revelation replaced investigation. Okay? So I fast forward to 21st century, and what do you find? You get things like this. Okay? This is in America. All right? So now, what I find interesting is the level of passion that it requires to actually do it. You got to like pay for this. Okay? A sensitivity to the money aspect of it. But we all know tomorrow's economies will be founded on innovations in science and technology, and of course that gets cut short if we lose our civilization.
And I just try to, put a reality check on that. Intelligent design has been around for millennia. Ptolemy, in the notes on Ptolemy is one of the great proponents of the geocentric universe, a brilliant mathematician, an Alexandrian mathematician, and he wrote in the margin of his greatest tome, when I trace at my pleasure the windings to and fro of the heavenly bodies. He's referring to the planets going forward and then retrograding and then going back again. When I trace at my pleasure the windings to and fro of the heavenly bodies, I no longer touch earth with my feet. I stand in the presence of Zeus himself and take my fill of ambrosia. That's a quote from one of the greatest scientists of his day, Claudius Ptolemy. And it's essentially intelligent design. He doesn't really understand why the planets are doing this. He thinks he has some angle on it with epicycles and the like. But at the end of the day, he's saying it's Zeus. And I'm basking in Zeus's handiwork. And so we look at that poetically. We're not saying, get it out of the school, stop it. So just look at the history of this, and it's there. you can't or shouldn't ignore it. The issue here is not that people think and feel that way. The issue is that it is not science, period. Therefore, it does not belong in the science classroom. Put it in history class. Put it in religious philosophy class or the history of philosophy class. But it never leads to discoveries. That was the only point I was making. I wasn't debating the existence of God. I was just simply saying it's not science. It doesn't lead to discoveries. And so that's the kind of ways I've been engaged. And even that has very heavy viewership. So I would say it's 1% of my public commentary, but it's 25% of all the views that people have of me on YouTube clips.
All right, here we go. We gotta go there. Ready? Gotta do it. Gotta go there.
Bingo.
I don't even like going there, but I'll go there because I know that's what you want, okay? All right, some numbers, we've seen these numbers before. In America, the number of people, they do these surveys. Are you religious? And it's not do you go to church or synagogue each weekend. Because a lot of people do that just to get dated, all right? So if you want to ask a more meaningful question, like, do you pray to a God for the intercession of power in your life? If you answer yes to that, you're religious, right? That's not a debate, all right? You ask that question of the American people, that number comes in about 90%. Okay, it's high. It's high. Now you educate people. You take them all the way to a PhD. The PhD, there are a lot of people who have undergraduate degrees in America who will tell you that they're educated, but in fact they're not. So I had to take this to a higher level to really to see how the numbers work. PhDs in any field, English, history, art, science. The percentage of those who are religious drops to 60%. Now, the PhD is a useful referent here because the PhD is the measure of your capacity to think independently of anybody's thoughts that came before you. That's an important transition point in a person's educational trajectory if they make a career as being an educator. So now we say, how about, of all the educated people, let's see what the number is for scientists in America. It's 40%. What's important here is that the science number is not a drop from 90%, because all scientists have PhDs. So the science factor here is the drop from 60% to 40%, not from 90%. So if you only show the public and scientists, it looks like being a scientist makes you an atheist. But a bigger drop is simply being educated. That's a bigger effect on whether you're religious than whether or not you're a scientist on the total number. Okay? This number splits between physicists, biologists, astrofolk. We're lower, down in the teens, 20, and then engineers and mathematicians are up higher, around 60. It averages to 40. How about the elite scientists? These are the ones that the scientific community votes for admission to the National Academy of Sciences. You could say that might be a biased system, sure. What's true is that everyone in there, essentially everyone in there, is unimpeachably accomplished. So if there's a bias, it's that there might be someone who should be in there and who isn't. Not that there's someone in there who doesn't belong. That's the distinction. You go to these folks, you get 7%. Number dropping precipitously. My argument here, by the way, when this number came out, Nature magazine had the headline, 93% of elite scientists reject God. That was the headline. And I'm thinking, that's not the headline. The headline is 7% of elite scientists don't reject God. Isn't that a more interesting fact? Isn't it? So my argument to sort of the enthusiastic atheists out there is that you are trying to convert people who are just in the street, practically, like your friends and your relatives. You're trying to convert them, maybe invoking just learn more about this and you'll see the light. When in fact there are scientists accomplished scientists who feel that way. So I kind of think maybe we should understand what's going on in that 7%. That could just be really interesting. Maybe they can't help it. There's some brain wiring that the neuroscientists will learn about. And then we'll just have a deeper understanding of what it is when people feel that way. And then not fight about it, but just kind of say, oh, that's an interesting reality about the human brain. This number gets smaller, by the way. How many philosophers are religious? It's less than 1%. Philosophers basically invented atheism. Most religious people in America fully embrace science. So the argument that religion has some issue with science applies to a small fraction of those who declare that they are religious. They just happen to be a very vocal fraction, and so you get the impression that there's more of them than there actually is. It's actually the minority of religious people who reject science or feel threatened by it or want to sort of undo or restrict where science can go. The rest, are just fine with science, and has been that way ever since the beginning. And by the way, there's no tradition of scientists knocking down the door, the Sunday school door, telling the preacher what to teach. There's no tradition of scientists picketing outside of churches, nor should there be some emergent tradition of religious fundamentalists trying to change the curriculum in the science classroom. There's been a happy coexistence for centuries, and for that to change now would be unfortunate, because I've seen this happen in other nations and other states where the consequences are that you just basically recede back to the cave, because that's where you land when you undermine the scientific and technological innovations that come about when you're a properly trained scientist or technologist. Consider also that in America, 40% of American scientists are religious. So this notion that there's some that if you're a scientist, you're an atheist, or if you're religious, you're not a scientist, that's just empirically false. It's an empirically false statement.
Do you think religion is useful as a vehicle maybe of just calming the mind, and it's essential to healthy living in the same sense as nutrition or something along those lines?
Well, that's been demonstrated to be true.
Oh.
So that's not a mystery that people take comfort in religion. That's been so since the beginning. And so the real question is, if you remove that comfort, is there some other comfort you can offer in its place? And a big part of the more vocal atheist is to try to convince religious people that you can lead a happy, productive, fulfilling life in the absence of reference to deity. And that's part of that big effort. I can say, coming at this as a scientist, that if you want to sort of feel the majesty of the universe, you can do it that's something else that can happen without reference to God. There's a lot of beautiful things in the universe that transcend our experience here on Earth that could take you to new places emotionally, physically, philosophically. So that's what the original Cosmos series did with Carl Sagan. It offered the universe. That was not an anti-religion tract. It offered the universe as something for the taking that would inspire you to think more about our place in the cosmos.
If you're trying to have a scientifically literate populace, or people, not second-hand scientists, but people who are informed enough about the process so that they can make appropriate decisions on policy issues when they're asked to vote on them, say.
That's a good definition of science literacy.
Fine. So then you say, okay, now we have a leader, a Speaker of the House who says that her agenda in 4 words is science, 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 and science. And you have a president who says to the National Academy of Sciences when he goes and does his visit, that he wants to restore science to its rightful place. Okay.
As was spoken in the inaugural address.
Right. What is its rightful place, in your opinion?
Science, the rightful place of science is, rightful is, I'd rather not use that word, because while I have strong opinions on a lot of things, I don't care whether you share my opinion. So I don't lobby people. I don't write letters to Congress to try to get them to do something that affects other people who are not me. That's not how I approach life. I approach life as a scientist and as an educator to try to get people thinking straight in the first place. All right? Trying to teach people not what to think, but how to think. How to interpret information that comes to you. How to think about what somebody says. How to judge what it is that someone else says. Judge the likelihood of it being correct or not. And that's how I view my role. So what is the rightful place of science literacy? It's that as many people in this nation should be as science literate as possible so that they can make informed decisions about issues that affect the health and well-being of this nation and of themselves.
We've had a space program for a long time, and what we've gotten out of it is Tang and LASIK surgery.
Oh,
come on.
You know what we got? Wait. You know what we got out of it?
What'd we get?
I'll tell you exactly. I'm not even going to list the spin-offs. I could, but I'm not. I'm going to list something else.
List three.
It transformed the culture of the United States of America in that decade to be one of innovation and discovery. And when you have that as part of your culture, you innovate. And when you innovate, you are responsible for birthing entire new economies that drive your nation's wealth. And during that decade, there were no jobs going overseas because they didn't know how to do what it is we were innovating. When you stop innovating, when you stop innovating, then everybody catches up. And of course the jobs are going to go overseas because in a multinational corporation...
There's lots of ways, to be honest, you can innovate without going into outer space. We've done a lot of innovation.
But it's mankind's fundamental drive to explore. Look at Europe when they sent the explorers across the Atlantic, and so I think it's part of a human
There were other
drive.
motives there. I mean, Queen Isabella said, by the way, Columbus, you may be an explorer and a discoverer, but while you're going, take these Spanish flags with you and put them wherever you park ship. So you can have geopolitical drivers for this. That's all I'm saying. What I'd like is a suite of launch vehicles where we can just choose what destination we want for whatever reason that drives it. It could be scientific, it could be touristic, it could be geopolitical. And that way, the solar system becomes our backyard, and to advance the space frontier, you have to innovate when tomorrow you do something that you did not do today. And that's the culture I want to resurrect from that era, the golden era of space exploration.
Okay.
Here's what happened. In the 1960s, we were at war with the Soviet Union, Cold War, and a little bit of hot war over in Southeast Asia. So we fear them because they put up Sputnik, which, by the way, people forget, was an emptied-out casing of an intercontinental ballistic missile. And Sputnik itself means fellow traveler, so it's all peaceful, but it was a ballistic missile hit without explosives. So that was a signal, and we freaked in America. So NASA got founded on the fear factor of Sputnik. All right, so we then go to the moon on the fear factor that Russia will control high ground. Then we go to the moon, space enthusiasts say, oh, we're on the moon by 69, we'll be on Mars in another 10 years. They completely did not understand why we got to the moon in the first place. We were at war. Once we saw that Russia was not ready to land on the moon, we stopped going to the moon. That should not surprise anybody looking back on it. Meanwhile, however, that entire era galvanized the nation. Forget the war driver. It galvanized us all to dream about tomorrow, to think about the homes of tomorrow, cities of tomorrow, the food of tomorrow. Everything was future world, future land. The World's Fair. All of this was focused on enabling people to make tomorrow come. That was a cultural mindset the space program brought upon us. And we reaped the benefits of economic growth because you had people wanting to become scientists and engineers who are the people who enable tomorrow to exist today. And even if you're not a scientist or a technologist, you will value that activity. And that, in the 21st century, are the foundations of tomorrow's economies. And without it, we might as well just slide back to the cave, because that's where we're headed right now, broke. I'm tired of saying this, but I'll have to say it again. The NASA budget is 0.4 of 1 penny on a tax dollar. If I held up the tax dollar and I cut horizontally into it 0.4% of its width, it doesn't even get you into the ink. So I will not accept a statement that says we can't afford it. Do you realize that the $850 billion bank bailout, that sum of money is greater than the entire 50-year running budget of NASA? And so when someone says we don't have enough money for this space probe, I'm asking, no, it's not that you don't have enough money. It's that the distribution of money that you're spending is warped in some way, that you are removing the only thing that gives people something to dream about tomorrow. The home of tomorrow, the city of tomorrow, transportation of tomorrow, all that ended in the 1970s. After we stopped going to the moon, it all ended. We stopped dreaming. And so I worry that decisions that Congress makes doesn't factor in the consequences of those decisions on tomorrow. They're playing for the quarterly report, they're playing for the next election cycle, and that is mortgaging the actual future of this nation. Tomorrow's gone. You do a simple Google, like YouTube and Tyson, my name, but put Neil so you don't get Mike. Right? Dining on someone's ear. Half of what ends up thrown onto YouTube are talks I've given where I'm trying to convince people, not only the public, but lawmakers and people in power, that investing in the frontier of science, however remote it may seem in its relevance to what you're doing today, is a way of stockpiling the seed corns of future harvests of this nation. And those seed corns, what they do is, whether or not you know it today, advancing a frontier, history has shown, has advanced the culture ever since the Industrial Revolution got underway. And we can speak more hegemonistically about it, that anyone who has embraced the powers of technology has enjoyed economic wealth, the likes of which the world has never seen, attendant with strength of security, okay? And so people say today, they'll say, so suppose the next terrorist attack is like a chemical attack. Do you call out the Marines, or do you get your best chemists to figure out what to do about that? There's a point where your weapons are not as useful as the brain of the scientist who you could bring to bear on the problem. And so I see science and technology and creative investments in it as the most significant infusion to our economy that could possibly be conceived. The problem is it's not going to boost the economy next quarter. It's got a time horizon longer than most people have the patience for, and most politicians have the re-election cycle to be tolerant of. So what we need is a longer view on those investments. I don't want to have NASA going hand in hand trying to get money to stimulate the frontier of cosmic discovery. And that frontier now involves biologists in the search for life, chemists in understanding the soils of Mars, aerospace engineers. You know what I don't want to do? I don't want to stand in front of 8th graders and say, who wants to be an aerospace engineer so that you can design an airplane that's 15% more fuel efficient than the one your father flew? That's not going to get him. But if I say, who wants to be an engineer and design the airfoil that'll fly in the rarefied atmosphere of Mars, I'm going to get the best students in the class, and you know it. Because that's an exciting project for smart people to work on, motivated people to work on. And when you have them, they invent stuff. They discover things. They transform the culture in which we live on a time horizon that is not easy to just tell someone in a one-sentence soundbite. And what I want is a level of science and cultural literacy that will allow the public to be able to think beyond the election cycle, to think for themselves and say, this is a good investment. How many times have you heard people say, if you're not among us here, why are we spending money up there when we have the problems down here? Have you ever asked how much money we're spending up there? Ask that question. You know what the answer is? I've asked people, how much money do you think we're spending? Here's your tax dollar. How much do you think? 10%? 15%? Those are the kinds of answers I get. You know how much is getting spent? The rovers, the space station, the space shuttles, all the launch vehicles, all the NASA centers is 0.6 of 1 penny on your tax dollar. 0.6 of 1 penny pays for it all. And you're telling me, why are we spending money there and down here?
If you need that money to solve these problems, you got some other problems going on, okay? That's a whole other problem with society. So, I'm sorry, I'm getting off. So my point is, I think the greatest, the greatest need is to be able to have the foresight necessary to make investments on the frontier of science, even if at the time you make those investments, you cannot figure out how that might make you rich tomorrow. Michael Faraday, in the 1840s, was the first one to pass a wire through a magnetic field. And it made a little meter tick it moved a meter. He hooked up to it. Now this guy, you do this and this happens. That's kind of cool. If you're nerdy, to a nerd, that's a cool thing, right? You do this and this happens. And so what was happening is, it induced a current through the wire. He showed his colleagues. It looked like just kind of a curiosity, a toy. Showed it to Parliament. They say, why, this is what we're funding? We're funding this toy? And this may be apocryphal, but it is said of Faraday, in response to this inquiry, said this, because they asked, well, what value is this to the British Empire and to the king? He said, I don't know what value it is today, but I know one day you're going to tax it. And in fact, that is the foundation of how all electricity is made today. And it would take another 60 years before electricity would come to homes. But who could have known it at the time? I don't want to be left behind.
I will not leave you behind.
Last thing I'll say. Yes. Last thing I'll say. The biggest news story last year to me was not the methane flatulence. No. The biggest news story happened December 22nd, something like that. I forgot what day. A press release comes out. Russia says they want to send a mission to deflect Apophis, the killer asteroid.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, I said if that hits, it's going to hit the Pacific, which affects us. Okay? Russia says we're going to launch a mission. We're going to start designing it now. We're going to fund it. Oh, by the way, the United States is welcome to join us. And people say, oh, that's nice, a little international thing. And I'm saying, wait a minute. Something's wrong here. Aren't we the ones who are supposed to be starting missions and then invite other people to join us? Isn't that how it's been? So that was a sign, one of many, that our significance and meaning on the world stage is fading. And it's fading fast. And it's not a cliff, it's just a fade. And the day will come where the rest of the world just makes their own decisions about the future of their own space exploration and technologies. And we're sitting back saying, hi fellas, can we join along?
Neil, we already proved we can deflect asteroids in the movie Armageddon.
Yes. So there's our fantasy. We don't do it in real, we do it on the silver screen, and we're happy about that. Maybe we got to fix that disconnect.
Last question. Why is there something instead of nothing? 10 words or less.
Just because. So I got to do this in haiku then. Okay.
Okay, 575.
Words that make questions may not be questions at all.
I am well rebuked. Neil deGrasse Tyson, it is an honor to have you here and an honor always to talk to you. Please, come on, get up for Neil deGrasse Tyson.